the drive. Tatum the finish. It is banner 18. The mission demanded is mission accomplished.
What's up, everybody? This is Noa Dalzell, and I'm here at the Auerbach Center where the Celtics sort of practiced, I think, but we did hear from Joe Mazzulla, Al Horford, and Derek White after last night's 108-105 overtime loss, and got some new information, in particular about Kristaps Porzingis' health, that I think is, not really necessarily what I expected. So we'll talk a little bit about what Porzingis had to say, or what we learned about Porzingis. We'll talk a little bit more about what Joe and Derek and Al kind of all stressed to us today. And just, I rewatched last night's game. I know I went live at 1 a.m. from TD Garden. I rewatched last night's game and have a few more thoughts on kind of what went wrong and how they can bounce back. And I continue to be really encouraged by what I saw in that replay, as far as things that the Celtics can exploit, things that the Knicks did really well that I think are controllables, and things like that. So as always, feel free to put in any questions or comments in the chat, and I'll be happy to answer those as we go here. So first and foremost, I think the most newsworthy thing that happened yesterday was Kristaps Porzingis leaves the game midway through the second quarter. He does not return, and he comes out at halftime, runs up and down a little bit, and from there goes back into the locker room. And early in the third quarter, the Celtics public relations team, which they're responsible for putting out injuries, they say that he has a non-COVID illness and that he's questionable to return. He doesn't come back into the game the rest of the way, but it's just kind of a lingering thing that he is not available the rest of the night. Luke Cornett was already in foul trouble because they were kind of using him to hack Mitchell Robinson early on, and so Luke now has 5 fouls early in the fourth quarter, and Al Horford really has to carry the load at the center position. And so we kind of look at all of that, and Kristaps Porzingis' absence does become more important in the second half. They haven't used Neemias Queta or Xavier Tillman, so it's really that 3-man center rotation, and they like to go double big, especially against this Knicks team, and so they were more limited in what they were able to do without him. So when I saw Kristaps Porzingis had an illness, the first thing that I thought was, this is not a new thing, because he dealt with an illness in late February. It held him out of 11 games between late February to mid-March. He came back in March 15th at Brooklyn. That was his return game from that extended absence. And he was pretty candid about how frustrating that illness was. They didn't know exactly what it was. He had actually tweeted on March 10th to the fans, I'm dealing with an upper respiratory illness. We don't know exactly what it is. We're working hard to get back out there, all of that. And I asked him, why did you tweet that? And he said, I didn't want fans to think that I can't play through a cold. This was bad. This was a bad illness. He said it was the sickest that he's ever felt in his life. Every time he tried to work through the lungs and everything, it just felt like there was a big crash. There was a Lakers game that he wanted to kind of find a way to work through, and he said he told a fan on Instagram that he was going to play in that game, and then ultimately he was not able to go, and that was in early March. So we're 2 months removed from that, and until then, so I have two of my coworkers who are Lakers fans are in the chat distracting me. Thank you very much, colleagues. But I'll just say from the Porzingis standpoint, and then I'll go through questions, and I will answer your questions, that we learned something big today, and that's that he's still been dealing with this illness. And the exact quote from Joe Mazzulla was that too. Okay, I think I'm back. Sorry, I think my mic got disconnected, so I'm just going to use my computer mic. So the quote, I'll read the exact quote from Mazzulla on Porzingis. He said, since he came back, he's been kind of dealing with it, working through it, fighting through it, doing the best he can. And I think it was just too much for him in that game. He had been working through it since he's gotten back, and he's done a great job of being available. It was just hard for him to continue yesterday. And so I think we now have some context on the fact that even though he's been back since mid-March, he has not been 100%, and he has been kind of dealing with the lingering effects of an illness that we still don't know exactly what it is. And I don't know that that's why he struggled in the first round. First round, he averages 12 points per game, shoots 35% from the field. I thought he struggled a little bit defensively towards the end of the series. But ultimately, you know, this is now a factor, and he's now one of the guys that we have to think about and we have to worry about heading into game 2. Jrue Holiday, I thought, looked really good in his return from the hamstring strain, and he said that he's going to kind of have to see how it responds, and we didn't hear from him or see him today, so I don't know how he did. But we now have that information that Porzingis is potentially somebody we have to think about moving forward here in the next couple games. Porzingis did not we did not see him at all today. He was not in the locker room by the time I got in there. And Joe Mazzulla said he's feeling a little bit better today and that he's day-to-day. Sam Hauser also day-to-day after spraining his right ankle in yesterday's game on that foul on OG Anunoby. So I think the main thing that you're seeing now is that they are now potentially going to have a 7-man rotation yesterday. And that includes 2 guys that have a lingering injury in Jaylen Brown and Jrue Holiday that are kind of working through that. And the Knicks have been fully healthy. And so, when you talk about repeating, I think one of the things that always has to come your way is health and things working out. And in this case, I think right now you're seeing that they're dealing with some adversity in that regard. And so that's the most important thing ultimately, is that they can get healthy. And I think when it comes to Porzingis, I feel bad even speculating on what it is that he's dealing with from a health standpoint, because it's bigger than basketball. And, something that's lingering for multiple months, it's possible that it is a just lingering respiratory illness, but it's also, there's a million things that can go wrong with your health, as everybody unfortunately knows. And so that's the first thing that I think about coming out of yesterday's game, is just hoping that he as a person is okay, regardless of whether he's available to go in game 2 or if he's limited or if that's partially responsible for why he's been struggling. And so that's the first thing. Second thing that I'll note from our media availabilities today is that Joe Mazzulla had a kind of an interesting back and forth with a reporter who asked him about the fact that the Knicks shot 50% from 3 in the second half. I think ultimately, there was some shot variance. The Knicks made 2 more threes than the Celtics, despite attempting 23 fewer threes. I thought the Knicks had some crazy open looks, and I thought that the Celtics took some bad shots. But generally speaking, if you were to simulate exactly the shots that the Celtics took yesterday and the exact shots that the Knicks took, normally the Celtics are going to outshoot the Knicks. And so Joe kind of said, that's a fascinating, duality here, because on one hand, all of the initial questions that Joe was asked in today's media availability were about the fact that the Celtics took too many threes and that they struggled from 3. And then in the same vein, moments later, he was asked about the defense and about the fact that they, kind of gave up and conceded open threes and New York took advantage. So I followed up with Joe about just the defense and about how he felt about it overall. And I think the biggest thing that stood out to me is, and he said this exactly actually, so sometimes he skirts around answers, but I felt like in this case, he actually was fully open about what it is that he was dealing with, what the kind of they did defensively, and that they didn't pay attention to personnel tendencies enough. I thought Mikal Bridges and OG Anunoby, and in particular OG, who really keyed their comeback with some open threes. When they got it to 20, he had 2 consecutive threes. And when I rewatched the game, it was just apparent to me that OG was just treated as a non-threat, and that's not really what he is. This is a really good player that he had a high trade value. He's a great defender, but he's also a guy that can shoot threes at a high clip, and he always has been. And so from a personnel standpoint, I don't think they actually paid attention to detail and were as focused as you would like to see in a playoff game. And so even though New York only scored 108 points in an overtime game, you'll take that on paper. I feel like the Celtics defense left a lot to be desired. And I think when I watched the game in real time, the thing that I was thinking about was, wow, they got cold. They took too many threes. They hit too many, they never drove to the basket. And I am seeing comments here about the driving lane. I do think the Knicks were closing the driving lanes, but also every time the Celtics did drive late in this game, they got an open shot and they missed some layups. Tatum missed a layup. Brown missed a layup. Holiday, Porzingis in the first half missed wide open layups. So they weren't able to capitalize every single time. But yeah, credit to the Knicks defense. Al Horford said they were the better team last night. everybody has credited on the Celtics side what the Knicks were able to do. But I do think defensively, that was my biggest takeaway rewatching this game was not the offense, but it was the defense. Jaylen Brown, off-ball defense, he had a ton of mishaps and moments that were kind of a little bit out of character for the current version of him defensively. Jayson Tatum in transition had a couple of inexplicable plays, fouls, Anunoby on that dunk, on that steal late in the game. So I think, honestly, the story was more about the Celtics defense than I had initially anticipated watching this game. And I think that when you watch, when I asked Joe that today, like he didn't deny that. He didn't deny that from a personnel tendency thing, which is that's what they always talk about, right? When they talk about the scouting report and preparing for playoff series, it's all about how do you make sure that you're taking away the things that guys want to do, right? How do you make sure that you're limiting opponents' tendencies? If a guy wants to go left, force them right. Simple things like that. The guy usually jab steps twice. Like, be prepared for that. I felt like yesterday they moved away from the game plan a little bit, and it cost them. And if they hit more threes, then we don't talk about it. But because they only hit 15 of 60 attempts, which is a NBA record 45 misses, there's a lot more to kind of unpack there on the defensive end. And that's what stood out to me most. And I think if you were to rewatch this game, which honestly I wouldn't encourage fans to do so, I think the defensive end is what you're going to notice, especially down the stretch, fourth quarter, overtime. A lot of miscommunications, a lot of mishaps. Al Horford and Jrue Holiday, shout out to them. I think they really held their own and they saved the Celtics on a number of occasions despite that. So feel free to put questions in the chat. I'm going to get through some questions here. We're going to do about 50 minutes of questions before I wrap up here. But first, a quick message from our friends over at Game Time. Game Time is the best way to buy tickets to basketball games, to concerts, all sporting events. We're in the middle of the NBA playoffs. NBA playoffs are about to begin, and there's no better way to look through tickets for games. I'm looking right now at game 1 of the playoffs. Magic come to TD Garden. PrizePicks is the best place to turn your sports knowledge into cash. With millions of members, PrizePicks has made daily fantasy sports accessible to all. You just pick more or less on at least 2 players for a shot to win up to 2,000 times your cash. Run your game all season long on PrizePicks. Cash in on the basketball playoffs with PrizePicks. Don't miss your last chance to add your favorite players from the core to your PrizePicks lineup. Whether it's points, rebounds, assists, take your pick of more or less for a shot to win up to 2,000 times your cash today. Sign up today and get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It's guaranteed. The basketball playoffs are here and the action is heating up on PrizePicks, the best place to cash in on your favorite spots. Download the app today and use code CLNS to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code CLNS to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. PrizePicks, run your game. So I think my question around I think this is the big question that everybody has right now is why is Tatum 6'10" and obsessed with taking these contested step back threes? Did they relax? Is that kind of what it was? And I think when you asked Tatum and Brown after yesterday's game, there was a mix of answers. Brown a couple times said I got to watch the film. I'm not exactly sure what went wrong offensively, why it is that they blew this 20-point lead. And at the same time, they both acknowledged that there were moments where they settled, where they probably, in hindsight, could have gotten better looks. And Joe Mazzulla rarely likes to critique the Celtics shot quality because I think that he understands just how effective the three-point shot has been for the Celtics team. And therefore, you don't want to kind of move away from that or overreact to now you miss a bunch of easy ones. And I will say upon rewatching this game, they missed so many easy shots. I would say Jaylen Brown was 1 of 10. He probably shouldn't have taken 4 of those. I think Tatum probably shouldn't have taken 4 of those. Derek got so many clean looks and he struggled. He was 5 of 16 from 3. I thought Jrue Holiday, who was 2 of 7, got mostly good looks. There was 1 rush corner shot. So generally speaking, I thought the shot quality was actually pretty good. And I understand Joe's reluctance to critique it. And that's what he did today. And that's kind of what he's always done after poor shooting games. And I think it bothers people. But nobody likes to see them miss 45 threes. It's ugly. You look at the talent on this team. You look at Tatum and Brown's ability to get to the rim. But this Knicks team kind of dared them to shoot. They gave them those looks. I think they probably had some miscommunications and probably if they could go back, they would better defend some of those shots that they just didn't burn them. But I truly believe that if the Celtics get those looks in an entire series, they get that same shot profile, 7 games, they win 5 of those games. And that's what I think it comes down to. And it's the other things that are more controllables, right? It's the late game turnovers. It's the defensive tendencies that they neglected that they normally wouldn't. And then it's a few of those shots. And Joe always says there's 8 to 10 possessions in every game that you want back. And sometimes it costs you and sometimes it doesn't. And in yesterday's game, those 8 to 10 possessions were just too much to overcome against the Knicks team that's honestly very talented. And I did pick the Celtics to win in 5, but that's not a knock on the Knicks. The Celtics have beaten a lot of good teams in 5 games, between the Dallas Mavericks, who made it to the finals, the Pacers, who were very impressive last year in the conference finals, and all of that. So, you know, why did Tatum, why is he not driving to the basket more? I did think that he passed up some lanes. He passed up some opportunities to drive to the rim that I think if you watch this film right now, he's probably a little bit frustrated with himself. And then at the same time, he is so committed to hitting the 3-point shot because it just makes him so much more dangerous as a player. There have been times where I've been like, what if he just didn't shoot threes at all anymore? But the way that they have to guard him and respect his 3-point shot opens things for everybody else on his team, and it opens up driving lanes for him. And so if all of a sudden Tatum loses confidence in that shot, it completely changes the complexion of this team. And the same thing goes for Brown, who is fresh off of the worst 3-point shooting season of his career. He still, I think teams generally speaking respect that 3-point shot. So it's important that he hits them at some clip, because it just takes away. I mean, you see what happens to the Knicks offense when you dare Josh Hart to take threes and he won't even look at the basket, in a mid-range shot. So I understand why they shoot the threes. I think that in games like yesterday where there wasn't a true rim protector stretches and they still weren't going to the basket, you think to yourself, I feel like there's a lane here, and are they seeing something different? And I think that if they went back and rewatched today, which I know they did, it felt like there were moments where they could have taken advantage of the Knicks defense a little bit more than they did, and they kind of bailed them out. But again, they hit 5 more of those threes. I'm talking they go 20 of 60, which is still not great, 33%. This game, it never becomes an overtime game. It never becomes a clutch time game. And we're not having this conversation. Instead, we're having a conversation around, wow, the Knicks gave the Celtics 63s. And so it's all relative. It's all a discussion around, when you go cold, suddenly the narrative is you're shot chucking. When you're hitting threes, it's the Knicks defense conceded very shocked that the Celtics won a championship shooting. And so that's what Joe's frustration is after these shots, after these press conferences is like just this idea that, you don't, the narrative is really easy to write based on whether or not the shots fall. And they did take care of the ball. They only had 13 turnovers. They took 10 shots more than New York. So the margins weren't bad. And those are the things that he usually kind of hammers home the most. And this is a great point from Tom. I think that their Celtics are at their best when they generate threes off of paint touches, and a lot of them were not off of paint touches. At the same time, I did think that there were some very in character plays where there was an offensive rebound kick out that normally it's like an automatic shot for a shooter. The ball kind of lands in your hand. The defense is shuffling, kind of, trying to find everybody matchup, after a loose ball or things like that. And in this game, those shots didn't fall down the stretch. I would have liked to see Payton Pritchard a little bit more in yesterday's game. I thought that he was one of their more reliable sources of offense. He has 13 points on 3 of 6 shooting. He was the only Celtics player to shoot a respectable figure from 3. He goes 2 of 5 from downtown, and I think that he was going to continue to get those looks. So I would like to see him more down the stretch. He does play 24 minutes in this game. Anytime a game goes into overtime, I think it's hard to look at the minutes because now you look at it and Tatum, Brown, and White all played 44 minutes and Pritchard played 24, and I don't think there's a reason for the gap to be that sizable. But if this game doesn't go into overtime, then you look at it a little bit differently. But I think you're going to see a lot more of him tomorrow, especially if Hauser is out, which I would imagine that he is based on the fact that he was kind of limping out of the game yesterday. And especially if Porzingis is out, there's a question around, are they going to turn to Torrey Craig? Are they going to turn to Baylor Shireman? Are they going to extend that rotation? I would imagine they try to stick with 7 people still. And that's going to put a ton of pressure on the 2 guys that do come off the bench, or 8 people. And that's, Luke Cornett, Al Horford, and Payton Pritchard, and maybe Allen's kind of jumping into that starting lineup. So a lot of people are thinking about Miami. I brought up Miami a bunch of times heading into the series because I think whenever there's like an overwhelming amount of confidence in a late, this is not a first round series. You're playing a serious team. This Knicks team had the 5th best win percentage in the NBA. I can't keep stressing that. I think that when you talk about them struggling against the Cavs and the Celtics and the Thunder, like that dominated a lot of the discourse around their ceiling. But all of that goes out the window in the postseason, and they put themselves in position to earn the number 3 seed in the Eastern Conference. They had a better record than the Pacers and the Bucks. And so now they're in this point where you're seeing how do they manage to win all these games? Because they don't give up. And when they were down by 20 yesterday, they immediately cut the deficit to 14. It took 2 seconds. It was not like they were up by 20 for a quarter and then finally the Knicks clawed back. They barely had that lead. And so could something happen like what happened in Miami? Absolutely. That happened because Miami got hot. The Celtics struggled. There were issues with that team that I think you could see from earlier on. I have a lot more faith in this 2025 Celtics team than the 2023 one. They were a lot more consistent during the regular season, with the exception of a couple week stretch where they struggled in December and January. So is it possible? Absolutely. And that's why, I would never assume, I would never look and say the Celtics are going to play the Cavs or the Pacers. You saw last night, the Thunder lost game 1, the Cavs lost game 1, and the Celtics lost game 1. So anything can happen. If you could just automatically assume that all the best seeds are just going to advance to the conference finals, then there's no reason to play these games. And there were some things about the way that this game was lost that reminded me of Miami. That being said, I expect them to come out and win this game because they've been so elite off of losses over the past few seasons. They very rarely lose 2 games in a row. And in the playoffs, they bounce back after every loss they faced last year. They split game 1 and 2 versus Miami last year. They split games 1 and 2 versus the Cavs. If they win game 2, they're in the exact position that they were in after both of those series. So game 2 now suddenly has a lot more pressure than it otherwise would. I asked Al Horford about it, and he said, we let down our crowd in game 1. We're going to do everything we can ahead of game 2 to make sure that we win this game. And Derek White said the same. So, there's going to be concerns about, they didn't adapt, they didn't change their approach. That has kind of been their MO over the past few seasons. I think that they are going to stick with it, even if it feels frustrating to fans, because it has gotten them to where they are today. And so this is the thing, like, it there's a 7-game series for a reason. This comment here from Phil says that. And so I think if this was March Madness and it's all single elimination games, you maybe switch to plan B more often. But I think that you stick with your process. Joe Mazzulla had some great quotes about that this season, but it's all about the process. It's not about the outcome. And you don't let that change anything. So we'll see. And I don't know if Jayson Tatum is not driving because of the wrist injury. He did say in the Orlando series after coming back that his team knows how serious the injury is. So it's possible that it's something that is more serious than what we know. And that's part of what's kind of pushing him to take 3-point shots or settle more. But I'm not going to write that off as an excuse, because ultimately he was attacking the basket really well in games 3, 4, and 5 upon coming back from the wrist injury, even though it did hurt his wrist. So I don't think that he's too scared of the contact. If he was able to do that a week ago, I think that he'd be able to do that here against this Knicks team that hasn't necessarily fouled hard too much. So yeah, so I'm not going to say that I don't necessarily think that's the reason, but you never know. I think a lot of guys are dealing with different things. Like, we didn't know that Porzingis was dealing with lingering effects from this illness until literally today. And so we always have a small slice of the pie. They do their best to try to keep us in the dark as it relates to injuries and health. You see what happens when all of a sudden they have there's some clarity around something, like with Steph Curry and his thumb. The Rock is not going at his thumb every time. So Tatum is not going to say I'm not, I'm avoiding driving to the basket because of my wrist. That clearly signals to the Knicks a point of weakness. But it's pretty apparent to me that it's something that is still existing. I just don't think it's the main reason why he's settling. I think that he has a tendency to do that. And it's just human nature, right? Like, if there's a weakness to Tatum's game, I think he would admit it. I think the people around him would admit it. It's the fact that sometimes he settles when he has a lane. And he's gotten a lot better at it. And I think last night he reverted to some of the habits that have been more frustrating. And I thought that it impacted his defense. And I thought that it also, missed shots also impacted Jaylen Brown's defense. And so those two guys can be elite defenders, and they weren't in yesterday's game. And that was one of the things that stood out to me most. And I watched, and just last comment here about Al. Al did get caught on an island with Brunson. Brunson did hit a few threes over him. Generally speaking, I felt really good about Al's defense in this game. I thought that he was able to impact possessions more often than not. And they will live with that. Like, your starting center will occasionally get switched on to a guard. And they will live with Donovan Mitchell ISOing Al Horford once in a while. It happened last year in game 2, and the Celtics lose that game. And everybody was talking about Al Horford as a defensive liability. In a big sample size, he's as reliable as they get. And even in yesterday's game, he was an asset for them defensively more than he was a liability, in my opinion. So it's just, that's going to happen. Brunson is going to get his. Brunson's 29 points and 9 of 23 shooting, though, was not why they lost the game. I think that, you have to kind of think about the other guys. And against Dallas and against some series, you can leave the other guys be and they won't beat you. And against this team, the other guys just have a little bit more experience and a little bit more talent. And Mikal Bridges and Josh Hart and OG Anunoby are big game players ultimately, at least a lot more so than Orlando's role player cast, Dallas's. I think Indiana also has some big time role players, and you saw that series get more competitive as well. So I disagree with this comment, Dylan. It seems like last year the Celtics had more than one way to beat you. This year it feels like it's live and die by the three. I think in the Orlando series, you saw that they found ways to win without the three-point shot. Their free throw rates were way up. Their drive rates were way up. It just felt like yesterday, because it was so available, that they had a hard time shying away from it. And I don't know if it was like they were so eager to shoot threes after the Orlando series that it was just so nice to finally get the looks that they love. They love shooting threes, right? It's individually, they like doing it. As a team, it's been their MO. So a part of me felt like, and this is kind of dumbing it down, but a part of me felt like they were so excited to finally have these clean looks that it was hard to shy away from them. But I think they have other ways to beat this team. I think they have other ways to beat teams in general. And you saw that in the first round where the three-point shot was basically non-existent. And they were still able to do that. So the question is, can you move away? I think in generally, I'm okay with the 63-point attempts. I just think down the stretch when you need a basket, a Tatum fadeaway three, when he doesn't have it, is not your best look. So it's just in those moments that I feel like, okay, that's a little bit frustrating. But again, it won them a title. So I think there's a level of confidence that, you could doubt the approach, you could doubt the 63s. And I think people did last year, and it ultimately paid off. And if it, right now, a 1-0 deficit is not going to be enough to change it up. If they now lose this game, maybe they go back to the drawing board and change things up. So we'll see. Yeah, and Phil says this is the X factor. And Anunoby averaged 9 points a game this season. 29 can't happen. I think that's exactly right. And the same thing for Mikal Bridges. The same thing, ultimately, like, those are the guys that are going to change things more than anything else. And so I like, historically, when the Celtics allow the star players to get theirs and limit the role players. Like, I think you live with that. And Brunson is a guy that has the ball in his hand. Sometimes it feels like he passes as a last resort. And so I would have rather see Brunson score more and have more early shot attempts, and even Karl-Anthony Towns, and limit the other guys. So maybe they'll change their approach completely. I wasn't sure what they were going to do heading into this game, and I think they ended up putting more pressure on Brunson than I expected, and conceding more looks for the other guys. But I would rather have Brunson go for 50 and have OG not get those clean looks. And I think you're going to see somewhere in the middle of kind of adjusting all of that. So last question here before I wrap up from practice. Is Porzingis a winning playoff player? He's been largely MIA in the playoffs since joining this team. I think he's an unproven playoff player. And ultimately last year he plays in just 6 games, 3 in the first round and 3 in the finals. He was awesome in the finals. Everybody remembers that he had some huge moments. I don't know what happens in the series if he doesn't come out the way that he did in game 1. One of the most electric moments that I've ever seen in a basketball game. But he missed most of that playoff run with a calf strain, and then with that rare leg injury that he suffered in game 2 of the finals. And then he comes back and has to kind of play through that in game 5. At the same time, he doesn't have the same playoff pedigree that guys like Tatum and Brown and Derek White and Al Horford have. And so he's always been more of an X factor to me. I've considered him the X factor for the Celtics because I don't know exactly what it is that he is dealing with. I don't know exactly what it is that he can bring to this team. There's a level of confidence that I have in him because of what he has done in the regular season, but the playoffs are a different beast, and I think he still has to prove himself. So I don't know if the first round struggles have anything to do with the illness. I don't want to excuse them, but knowing that he's been dealing with something since mid-March that's limited his motor certainly fits what I saw with my own eyes in the first round. But I'm not going to confidently say here I have full faith in Porzingis in the playoffs because, again, I look at guys' body of work and his body of work is not there yet. Same with Payton Pritchard. I have a guy that I'm really high on. I think that he can really impact this team, and I would have liked to have him had a bigger role in last night's game. But until you do it consistently in the postseason, I think there's still an outstanding question around your ability to compete at the highest level in that environment where calls get tougher, physicality increases, and everything. So I think there's a lot that he wants to prove in this postseason run, and hopefully he gets the chance to do so, and hopefully he's not too limited in kind of what he's able to do in this game and in the series. And I hope that he's able to come back tomorrow and be his best self, and at least be available to go, because that would be kind of scary. So we'll see. I hope for him, regardless of the basketball, I hope for him that he's good to go tomorrow, because I don't know what this is, but it's just a little bit worrying that something has kind of bothered him for months now, from a health standpoint, forget basketball. And so we'll see about that. And then just one last reminder here from Phil, who's had a lot of positivity in the chat. Shout out to Phil for maintaining a level head here. the Celtics have been awesome on the road this whole season. They were historically good. They were one game short of the all-time record for most road wins in a single season that the Warriors had in 2016. So we'll see if they can continue their winning ways in the postseason. They have 2 games in Madison Square Garden coming up that are going to become critical. They want to win game 2 first and foremost, and then they head to the road. And the Knicks have also been really good on the road this season. These are 2 teams that have actually, compared to what the expectation is, have been better on the road than at home. So we'll see how it shakes up. I think they have all the confidence in the world in their ability to win at Madison Square Garden. I don't think that they're afraid, but all of that. So we shall see. I'm going to wrap it up here. Thank you so much, as always, for tuning into these live shows. You can watch the entire press conference, lineup from today from Kristaps Porzingis, Al Horford, and Derek White. Sorry, not Kristaps Porzingis, Joe Mazzulla, who talked about Kristaps Porzingis, Al Horford, and Derek White. They were all at practice. They all spoke to us. They all answered our questions. You can also watch all of the post-game press conferences from Game 1, which were Drew Holiday, Jaylen Brown, and Jayson Tatum. All of that is on CLNS Media, as well as our post-game show, The Garden Report, which is out after every game. And you can subscribe to my podcast. I'm going to be going live from every practice. Also, after games, I have post-game podcasts. I have a game from last night's podcast from TD Garden. I went live at 1 o'clock in the morning, so you can catch that as well. It's the You Got Boston podcast on YouTube, Apple, and Spotify. So subscribe to that if you're watching this on Twitter, if you're watching this on CLNS Media. My channel, turn on notifications, and I'm going to do just questions all the time. So if you have questions, you can join, ask your question, and I'll make sure to answer it. So with that, thank you so much for tuning in. Looking forward to Game 2. Looking forward to kind of seeing this team bounce back, and I have all the confidence in the world that they will. And thank you, as always, for